of studying and taking care of patients and that for nearly 40 years. And it's just amazing, just amazing. You know, I'll just tell you a very quick story, I'm sorry, and then I'll get to this. But I was in my office one time, and I came out from a patient room, and I came up to the reception area, you know, not where the patients would sit waiting to be seen, but where they would see the receptionist before they left. And it just happened that the door from the counter there out into the reception area was open. I look out there, and here is a man in his robe. This is in the afternoon. It's like 3 or 4 in the afternoon. He's in his robe, and he is crawling to the door because he's in so much pain. And so I ran out. I helped him get into the office, did a brief examination because he was in so much pain. I really couldn't do much of an examination, but had an idea of what was going on. And so I gave him a treatment and sent him on his way. He was actually not crawling when he left the office. He was walking when he left the office. And I'm telling you, the next day he came back. He opens the door, and I'm in with a patient, and this is what he says. "Where's my miracle worker?" He was in such great shape. Now, I'm gonna say that I did something correct there to help him, but his body, what God gave him, his body used to help heal him, and you know, it was just a great thing. So I was thinking tonight about this, about the fact that God made us for our body to work and to heal. There's times when we get hurt, there's times when we get sick, but God put this ability in our body to take care of itself and to heal itself. And I don't know this story of Jesus. You know, remember the man who was on his mat at the pool of Bethesda? And he'd been on his mat, or he'd been unable to walk for 38 years. And Jesus saw him and said to him, "Would you like to get well?" And he said, "Well, I can't." Because remember, the pool would bubble up, and then somebody gets into the pool and they would be healed. And he said, "Well, I can't. The pool bubbles up, and before I can get in there, somebody else does, and here I am." And Jesus said to him, "Take up your mat and walk." So in verse 8, Jesus told him, "Stand up, pick up your mat, and walk." Instantly the man was healed. He rolled up his sleeping mat and began walking. But this miracle happened on the Sabbath, so the Jewish leaders objected. They said to the man who was cured, "You can't work on the Sabbath. The law doesn't allow you to carry your sleeping mat." But he replied, "The man who healed me told me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" "Who said such a thing?" they demanded. The man didn't know, for Jesus had disappeared into the crowd, but afterward Jesus found him in the temple and told him, "Now you are well, so stop sinning, or something even worse may happen to you." Then the man went and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had healed him. I was thinking about that riding my bike here, and I was just thinking it's an example. I mean, Jesus did the miracle for the man, but we have the miracles every day. Amen. Yeah. I think I told Pastor, not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before, I was riding my bike, and I had a tea in this hand. Did I tell you this, Pastor? I had a tea in this hand, and I was coming up to the stop sign at my place, and I was doing what I shouldn't do. I was going to ride through the stop sign. So I looked to the left. It's clear. I looked to the right, there's two cars coming, and I'm going to ride out in there, and I'm either going to get hit by them or I'm going to hit them. So my bike has handbrakes. Remember, the right hand is for the rear wheel, the left hand is for the front. Well, my T was in this hand, and I reflexively, and I flipped right over the, yeah. Didn't get hurt. I didn't think I got hurt. I did find a big bruise on the inside of my thigh, but B saw it the other day. He saw the bruise there, and he said, "Papa, what happened?" So I told him, and I made sure I told him Papa was not doing what he was supposed to do. Well, all right, let's get started here. So, in the beginning, Jesus created male and female. He created us. Amen. God's miracle of the human body. Well, just as a reminder, I'm not trying to make you my patient. We're not creating a doctor-patient relationship with these presentations. I'm trying to inform you, and you can take that information and talk to your doctor about it, okay? All right, so, wait a minute, I want this one. Where is it? I thought I had a slide in there that said that true science should lead us to God. But if I don't have it, yeah, I should. That's right. True science should lead us to God. I just can't even believe that. I can't believe that man is so arrogant to think that they know better than God. It really takes a degree. It's an arrogant spirit. Yeah. Tyler, can you take us to 51, please? Slide 51. I'd be clicking here. So we're coming up here now to, okay. Yeah, slide 51. So tonight what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the, thank you. Remember this is where we said we would end last week. So it's all about carbohydrates, okay? Well, yeah. It's about carbs that turn into glucose quickly or fats and proteins that take a lot longer, because we have to take them and run them through cycles and convert them into the sugar that the cells need. So, last time we talked about angiopathy. No, we didn't. I'm sorry. So we're going to talk about macro, and then we'll talk about micro. And so here's some of the things here's our atherosclerosis, here's our myocardial infarction. Infarct means for tissue to die. It's a term that means that the tissue has died, okay? And in this case, since we're talking about the muscle of the heart is dying because it doesn't have a blood supply. The blood that goes through the heart does not supply the heart. I mean, when it's in the atrium, the two upper chambers are the atria. Atrium is singular, atria plural, and the two lower chambers are the ventricles. So as the blood passes through the atria and the ventricles, all it's doing is going through the pump. Not until it enters the aorta and then goes to the heart tissue through the coronary arteries. Coronary means heart. Is the heart supplied? So those arteries, the aorta is the largest artery. The coronary arteries are much smaller, and they can become plugged. And when they become plugged or narrowed, not enough blood's getting through them, then not enough blood is getting to the heart tissue, and we can have a damage. Now, this is what's commonly called a heart attack. Okay, that's a heart attack. Now, in a heart attack, the heart is still beating. But that's why you want to get to the doctor or to the hospital right away while it's still beating, because if enough damage occurs to the heart muscle, then it will go into arrest. Cardiac arrest is when the heart stops, and that's when they put the paddles on to try and get the heart going again. CVA is cerebrovascular accident. Cerebro is brain, okay? The vessels, vascular is the vessels to the brain. And so once again, not enough blood is getting through, or the vessels are plugged, or we're having a bleeding. Okay, that's a stroke. Peripheral vascular disease and claudication. We're going to talk about all this. This is the changes in the skin, and then ulcers on the feet. Okay, so we're going to go through each one of these. So here we go. Atherosclerosis, a healthy vessel is nice and clear. Here we've taken this and now we're looking at it on end. Right here is where the blood would flow through it. It's nice and clear and the blood can flow through well. Unimpeded. Here we have some deposits, plaquing of fat, cholesterol, calcium, and we have a narrowing. And so now the blood is restricted as it goes through there. This is what we're referring to when we say hardening of the arteries. Atherosclerosis, also known as arteriosclerosis, hardening of the arteries. What can cause it? Hyperglycemia, which is diabetes, and lots of other things. Well, hyperlipidemia, but we're focusing on this. So, in a myocardial infarction, which we mentioned is the heart attack, the coronary arteries, which are these, all right? So here's the aorta. The blood comes from this left ventricle, goes up into this aorta, and then out to the body. But you see there's these branches that come right off of the aorta. So the blood leaves the left ventricle, goes into the aorta. As soon as it goes into the aorta, it's coming back to the heart to supply the blood and the oxygen that the heart needs. And so those are the coronary arteries. And so those are the ones that can become plugged or narrowed by the plaquing. And when that happens, you know, the average, let's just say, you know, let's just take the average. Textbooks say that the average heart rate is about 75. So your heart is beating 75 times per minute. That means that every 0.8 seconds, it's contracting. So in 1.6 seconds, it's made 2 contractions. And if we took now this is the cardiac muscle, which is a little different muscle than skeletal muscle. But if we took skeletal muscle and contracted it every second, it wouldn't be long before that muscle would begin to burn and ache, and it would hurt, and we'd have to stop. But the heart never stops. Never stops. So because it never stops, it has a high demand for oxygen, which is supplied by the blood, and for the veins that are with these to take the CO2 away. And if that doesn't happen, if it's not getting the oxygen or the CO2 is not being taken away, then we can have damage to the tissue. Now, if that damage is just a little bit, let's say it's just a little bit right here, our heart will still work. But if we have some damage right here, now that part of the heart's not working, so this part of the heart's got to take over what this part of the heart is doing. That means it's working harder. And you let that go too long and the damage spreads. And if too much of it gets damaged, then the heart will stop. It'll just say, hey, no more. And so that's a cardiac arrest. All right? So that's the difference between a heart attack or a myocardial infarction and a cardiac arrest. Now, our heart is incredible. We can even go into arrest. And if somebody gets there with paddles, we can be saved. It's amazing. Well, next is stroke. So, right Right here are vertebral arteries. These are called the vertebral arteries. This is the internal carotid right here. These vertebral arteries, they're called vertebral arteries because if I had a skeleton here, I could show you that in the vertebrae of the neck, on the sides there's a piece of bone that sticks out. It's called the transverse process, and so there's one on the right, one on the left, and they've got these holes in them. They've got holes in them, and this vertebral artery goes. Whoops. I'm sorry. Hey, I turned it off. Anyway, the vertebral arteries go right up there through these holes, and they are actually passing through the transverse processes of the cervical spine from what we call C6. There's 7 bones in the neck, from the 6th bone on up to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then they come up here and they join to make this artery right here. You know how roads, you can be on the road and you're going along and it's, whatever road it is, and then you go through an intersection and the name of the road is changed, right? Well, that's what happens with arteries all the time, okay? So right here is the vertebral arteries, and right here is the basilar artery, and the basilar artery goes to this thing right here. This is incredible, folks. This is an example of a creator making things to protect us, because you'll notice this is a circle. You see that circle? Here's what that means. Now the brain cannot be starved of oxygen. It'll be damaged very quickly. But let's just say, and so this circle, see what we don't really see, you see it a little bit right here. Right here is the brain stem, which becomes the spinal cord and goes on down, okay? So right here, this goes around the brain stem, and the thing about it is, because it's a circle, let's just say that we get a blockage right there. Okay, blockage right there. Well, because it's a circle, the blood will come up, go around this way, and feed all these branches. So if we get one blockage in the circle of Willis, we're still protected. Now, hopefully we'll find it. Hopefully we'll find it at some point and then fix it. But that's the great thing of this circle, is a blockage right there. You see this artery right here? We get a blockage right there. Well, the blood will come around here. The blood's going to come to there and feed that branch. Come around here, feed this branch. So the circle of Willis is a great thing. Well, and we have there's all kinds of backup systems in the body all over the place. Well, look what happened here. In this slide, there was a blockage right here, so this part of the brain was damaged, all right? So this is a stroke, CVA, cerebrovascular accident. So that comes from a blockage, or it can come from a bleed, okay? Yes?
So when people recover from a stroke, is that because they've gone in there and operated and removed that blockage and the blood is free to go back to that damaged area, and that's how sometimes people recover?
No. Unfortunately, the brain doesn't regenerate at all. It doesn't regenerate at all, but our brain is so incredible that depending on the amount of damage, we can use pathways that maybe we didn't use before, or other pathways to help us do what that portion that was damaged was doing prior to the injury. So, no, brain tissue can't heal, but we have ways of re-educating the brain so that we use other pathways too.
And don't sometimes they say that new pathways grow sometimes, or not in this case?
In the central nervous system, see, the brain and the spinal cord are called the central nervous system, and then the nerves that come off are, they're the peripheral nervous system. In the central nervous system, in the human being, we don't have any ability to make new or regenerate damaged nerve cells. A nerve cell is called a neuron. And even in the periphery, it's very difficult. I mean, it can take a long time, you know. And let's say we sever a nerve. Here's a nerve, and we sever that nerve in the periphery. We've got to sew back, or at least approximate those two ends so that they'll come back together. Otherwise, we've lost that. So, but when it comes to the, you know, if we were to say, okay, we've got this number of nerve cells when we're born, or when we're an adult, we'll say, we can only lose, we can't regenerate or get new ones. So, PVD, peripheral vascular disease. There's this, you see this man, he's out for a walk. He's out for a walk. He's having a good, you know, he's doing his daily walk, but he's started to notice that his calves are aching a little bit when he walks. Well, on this particular day now, it's not just that his calves are a little achy. This time, he's really hurting. He's hurting so that he had to stop. Well, you see, when we walk, or when we're moving, the muscle, this is skeletal muscle, needs oxygen. It needs oxygen because it's using more energy. And remember, glucose plus oxygen helps us to make ATP. ATP is the energy molecule. So when we're walking, we're using ATP. We're using energy, and we have to regenerate ATP. But his vessels are getting narrowed. So the blood flow through those vessels is much less. You see the size of this arrow here? You can't even hardly see this, but there's a narrow vessel right there and a narrow vessel right here. Well, that's an indication that the blood flow through there is less because of the plaquing. And because it's less, we can't supply enough oxygen, and just like we were talking about, when we use skeletal muscle, if we don't supply the oxygen to it, it starts to hurt. And so that's what he's experiencing. He's experiencing that pain. Now, he stops walking for 3, 4, 5 minutes, the pain will go away completely, and he can start to walk again. Then he walks a little ways, and the pain will come back for the very same reason. So that pain that he's feeling is due to the reduced blood flow, and we call this intermittent claudication. So that's that aching that we feel, and we've all done it. You know, we've all used a muscle enough to make it burn or ache, and that's what he's feeling, the burn and the ache because of the lack of blood. Yeah.
Ron, if you're going up and down stairs, especially climbing stairs, and you get that pain in your leg, is that related?
It might be, yeah. Yeah, it could be, but probably isn't as bad as what this gentleman had, because if you're only getting it when you go up and down stairs, then, but not when you're walking, then it's probably not as severe. And it could be well, yeah, it might be an indication that this is coming on. Now remember, all this is, we're not talking about this just to talk about, we're talking about this because these are complications of diabetes. Okay? And so we're talking about big vessels now, the big vessels. And so when we talk about the big vessels, that's the macroangiopathy. Macro meaning big. How does God view your body? You know, do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy that person. For God's temple is sacred, and you together, we, are God's temple. You know, my dad, he's such a great guy. I could tell you stories about my dad, and someday maybe I will, but my dad, he always used to tell me take care of your body. It's God's temple. It's your temple. I mean, wow. What a lesson my dad taught me. Yeah. Just incredible. So I just thought, man, you know, God created this body. What does God think about it? So I went and found this one and put it up there. I might have another one too. So it doesn't show real well in this video, in this slide, but you can see just a slight darkening of the skin right here, and here is underarm, and here's some darkening. Well, this is called acanthosis nigricans, acanthosis nigricans, and it's due to that insulin resistance. And so the insulin begins to darken the skin. And so, now there's other things that can do it, other hormonal imbalances. Remember, insulin is a hormone. But there's other hormone imbalances that can cause it. Cancer and medications can. But assuming we don't have any of these others, then this would be if we saw that on a patient, then we would want to check. Are we having a problem with sugar levels, with supplying sugar to the cells? And then here I've got, look at that. That's an ulcer on the foot. And I'll just be honest, I chose pictures that aren't bad. Because believe me, while none of us would like to have, that's deep. You see that? That's well into the tissue. None of us would want to have that. This is, very mild. This is very, very mild, okay? And so over here, this just shows where we get them, any of those pressure points. And again, this is because those big vessels aren't supplying the blood to the tissue. And when tissue doesn't receive the blood that it needs, it's going to break down. And so it can't be healthy. Tissue can't be healthy without the blood supply. The blood, I've been thinking about doing a thing on the heart and the blood, a thing on how our body heals itself. So anyway, this is a nice, clean looking ulcer. So why? Well, we don't have the blood supply and we don't have the sensation, again, because of lack of blood supply. The nerves don't get the blood they need, and pretty soon we have decreased sensation. And so these things can happen and the patient not even know. They're not feeling any pain. Yeah.
I used to work with a guy, he had ulcers like on the side, the calves and stuff of his leg. Just nasty looking things that he was constantly,
Yeah.
doctor's office.
Was he a diabetic? I'm going to guess he was.
I don't know.
I'm going to guess he was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just know it was pretty painful for him.
Yeah, I bet it was. Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to guess that he was a diabetic. So here you go. Here's a question. And so, with our students, we ask this question and we give them this hint, which isn't much help for them because they haven't studied bacteriology. But this is a bacteria, Clostridium perfringens. Anybody hear of that bacteria before? You have, just not by that name, okay? Or you've heard about what this bacteria causes. We've all heard of what this bacteria causes. And so here we go. So this is the bacteria that causes gangrene, okay? So when we don't have the blood supply, then the tissue can't be healthy and we can't fight infection. And so here, I said I showed nice pictures. Believe me, this here is a nice picture because this is not, these are just drawings. These aren't the actual, let me tell you, I was going to picked something, and I just thought, you don't need to show people that stuff. It's disturbing to see it. Now, when this happens, this is going to be amputated. Okay. And so this is why diabetics have to take care of their feet, and they have to watch for this. Because see, if this, obviously this is a person who's gone to the doctor has found it, cleaned it up, but what if we have that and we don't? Don't go to the doctor, don't get it cleaned up. Then we can get into this. Then we can get into these things. Okay? So, anytime the blood isn't flowing well, the tissue's not going to be healthy. And I'll just tell you, bacteria. So, we've all heard of septic tanks, right? Septic tanks. Septic means, that there's bacteria there. And bacteria loves what's in a septic tank. Well, what's in a septic tank is gross, right? Well, tissue can get gross if it doesn't have a blood supply. And bacteria loves any place where the blood isn't flowing well, the tissue isn't healthy, it's going to go in there and feed. And that's how we get this kind of stuff going on. Okay? So, we see this, in the diabetic patient who's not controlling their blood sugar levels well, and has developed the peripheral vascular disease, which has led to probably a neuropathy, peripheral neuropathy, so they can't feel things. And next thing you know, they're going to the doctor with this. And at this point, there's not anything that the doctor can do except amputate this to prevent it from spreading on up. Well, micro. So that was macro. Now here's micro. And so micro is the very small vessels, and so this is an example of the difference in the vision of a person who's got over here, nice, healthy posterior eye, retina, the back of the eye, and a person who's got vascular damage to the retina. And I kind of wish that I'd actually gotten you a slide so that you could see what the back of the eye looks like. It's really amazing. You see these vessels, you see where the nerve comes, the optic nerve and the vessels. It's really amazing. And when the doctor looks in the back of your eye, you know what they're looking for? They're looking to see what the health of that nerve is, right, where it comes to the back of the eye. If there's some bulging, that's not good. And then they're looking at the vessels, and they look for things like, well, we call them silver wire and copper wire, and both of those are signs of bad vascular health to the retina. And so here we have this little guy. Here he is playing catch with Papa. And Papa's got good vision here, but here this Papa has got some damage to the vessels in the back of the eye. And so we call that retinopathy. See, always remember, this opathy always means that there's pathology or a disease process going on. Okay. So microangiopathy can lead to renal. There you go. Renal means kidney. Okay, kidney failure, retinopathy, neuropathy, and periodontal disease, and all kinds of other stuff too. This is just so. All right. Blood glucose test. So here's how we test for blood. We can do a fasting blood glucose test, and in a fasting, we're asking the patient not to eat for 8 hours. So it's usually done in the morning. Okay. Or we can do, you just have an appointment with the doctor, and you go in, and the doctor either asks you not to eat before your appointment, or the doctor asks you when was the last time you did eat, and you say, oh, I ate about 3 hours ago. So they might do a random 2-hour fasting. Or they can do a tolerance test, and it's really not done that much anymore. I'd hate to have it done. The glucose tolerance test, you go in and you have to drink straight glucose, and then they measure your blood sugar levels and see how they come down, and I've always kind of, I don't have any science to prove this, but I've always thought, man, oh man, if a person wasn't a diabetic, you start making them drink straight glucose, you're going to push them over the line, you know. Again, I don't have any science to prove that. It's just, I just wouldn't want to do it. All right, so what we do, we can monitor. So this is in the office, and this is in the office. So this tells you what your blood glucose is at this moment. You know, poke the finger, or they might draw blood, but either way, it's what your blood glucose level is right now. And that's a real good thing to do. But this one tells us how you've handled sugar over the last 3 months, over the last 90 days or so. Okay? And so here it is. This right here says hemoglobin A1C. Well, hemoglobin, that's the molecule on the red blood cell that binds with oxygen. So when we breathe and we take the oxygen in and then the blood delivers it to the cell, that oxygen is being carried on the hemoglobin. So what does hemoglobin have to do with blood sugar levels? Well, here's what it has to do. This test, this is a type of hemoglobin. So we have different types of hemoglobin. So when we do this test, we're checking the hemoglobin that is designated the A hemoglobin. That has nothing to do with blood type. Nothing to do with blood type, okay? So since there are different types of hemoglobin, this test checks the A hemoglobin. And then under the A hemoglobin, there are different kinds of hemoglobin, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so we're checking the 1. And then under the 1, there are different types of hemoglobin, and we're checking the C. Okay? Did I explain that so that makes sense? Okay. So, because, you know, I used to see this, the name of this test, and I used to, why do we call it A1C? You know, so I did a little research and found it, and thought that, you know, now that I found it, I feel like I know something, okay? So here's what it does. This is pretty amazing. What this measures is how much of the hemoglobin that's on that red blood cell is bound to glucose. So we don't want very much bound to glucose. And the way to keep it down low is to not let your glucose be high in the blood for long periods of time. So then the other thing we can check, we're checking ketones. You know, you do the, I'm sorry I don't have a good place to put this microphone. Is it sounding okay, or is it echoing a little bit? Okay. So ketones, remember, ketones are the waste product of what? The breakdown of fat. Remember, we get ketones when we can't deliver the sugar to the cells. Even though we may have plenty of glucose in the blood, we don't deliver it to the cells. And so our cells are saying, I'm hungry, and our body says, okay, I'm going to give you some sugar. So it begins to break down fat, and when it breaks down fat, a byproduct or a waste product of that are ketones. All right? So we check for ketones in the urine. And then as we're breaking down ketones and protein, our pH goes more acidic. Here's another test question, okay? On the pH scale, acid is above 7. Remember, 7 is neutral, neither acid or base. On the pH scale, is acid above 7 or below 7? It's below 7, okay? So the closer we get to 0, the stronger the acid is, all right? So, And you remember, I mentioned that we have a very narrow range on pH, 7.35 to 7.45. And when things are going bad in the body, we go acid. And we can't live in an acid state for very long. So we're checking for pH, because we don't want that, okay? And then we're checking for electrolytes, because electrolytes are going to help us to buffer the pH if we have to. So, here we go. Blood glucose levels. Here's where we want our blood glucose to be. If we haven't eaten for the last 8 hours, we would like our blood glucose to be between 70 and 99 milligrams per deciliter. Okay. Remember, deciliter means 10, or deci means 10, so we've taken a liter and divided it into 10 parts. And a milligram is, we take a gram, which is just a little bit, it's not very much, and we've divided that into 1,000 parts. So we don't want any more than 99 milligrams. See, it would take 1,000 milligrams to have a gram, right? So 99, 1/10 of a gram. We don't want it any higher than 1/10 of a gram of sugar per deciliter of blood. Okay, that's if we haven't eaten in the last 8 hours. Okay? Are we all with that? See, this is the kind of stuff that you have to remember when you're first hearing it. Because when you're around it all the time, or you're teaching it all the time, I mean, it's just, I tell my, I think I told you, I tell my students, I'm here, I'm going there, I know how to get there, but sometimes I skip these steps, and you have to help me remember that I skipped those steps, because it has to make sense to you. So there we go. So now, let's say we ate 2 hours ago. We want our blood sugar to be under 140. And when I actually check my blood when I'm teaching the students, and if it's been 2 hours, for me, I want it to be down here closer to this. That's where I'd like it to be. But we want it to be 140. Now, if our last meal was a piece of cake and some ice cream and jelly beans on top, it might be hard in 2 hours to get it down to here. I mean, down to there. But hopefully it'll be there. Okay? All right. I read one time, this has been a long time ago, I need to look at this again, but I read that at the turn of the century, 1900s, the average American ate 10 pounds of sugar per year. And so I was reading this in the 80s or 90s, but by the time I was reading this, the average American was eating over 100 pounds of sugar a year. So you see, that helps us understand, why we have more type 2 diabetes. And I can guarantee you this, with all the packaged foods we eat now, and you look at the labels, sugar is in everything. And so with all that sugar that's added to the food, I'm sure we might be 200 pounds now, especially if people are drinking a lot of pops. And you know what? The thing that's, I mentioned this maybe in the first night, the thing that's taking the place of pop is lattes. It's already 10 after 8. That's unbelievable. I'm so sorry. I apologize. Well, that means next week when we come back, we're gonna know A1C inside and out. Okay? I'm I really apologize. Man, I can't believe it. You know, I told you I teach for an hour and a half. My classes are an hour and a half, and so this time just flies by for me. Well, let's go ahead and say a prayer here. Father, first thing, let me thank you for these people. They come and listen to me each week, and they're so patient. And I hope I'm telling them good things, things to bless them, to help them with their health, and to help them love you even more. I thank you, Father, that we have the opportunity to come together to love one another, that you made our body, and you made our body so that every day we have miracles happening just by how you made us to heal ourselves. Thank you for this time we had tonight. I pray, Father, that this week, between now and Sunday when we come back together for the resurrection, to celebrate the resurrection of your Son, that we will have the opportunity to change lives. When we meet people, I pray, Father, that just our presence will change their life because your Holy Spirit is with us. In Jesus' name, Father, amen.